Good evening, everyone. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So, good evening. On behalf of all of us here at Fred Hutch, I want to welcome you to tonight's Science for Life presentation. Our presentation will provide a glimpse into the exciting science conducted here at the Hutch. Science for Life breaks down the concepts, skips the homework, and offers a chance for you to interact with world-class researchers in fun and interactive atmosphere. There are a few details to mention before I introduce tonight's speaker. There will be a dedicated time at the end of the presentation for question and answers. To avoid interfering with the AV being used to record tonight's presentation, please make sure all your cell phones are on silence. I'm pleased to introduce you to Matthew Trunnell, Vice President and Chief Information Officer here at the Hutch. Matthew's role here at the Hutch oversees enterprise and scientific computing services. He leads a team of data analysts and software engineers building new capabilities to leverage clinical data for research. Matthew is also working to forge connections between the Hutch and the broader technology community in Seattle to help power cancer research. Please join me in welcoming Matthew Trunnell.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Oh, I can hear me, so I guess hopefully you can. That may be a little too loud. So I don't know if you caught that. My title is I'm the Vice President for IT, CIO, so I'm an IT guy. So I'm not really sure what you're expecting here in terms of something interesting. But I appreciate your being here nonetheless. Actually, to be fair, I'm not an IT guy by training. I went to graduate school here at the University of Washington for physical oceanography. My background is actually computational fluid dynamics. So I spent my career has really been scientific computing. So that's a research ship. That's me on the top of the ship. But this was just moonlighting because my actual day oceanography job was computing. So after graduate school, I got to go to Scripps Oceanography. This was the view out of my office. This is, I lived my life backwards. I started out living in La Jolla with an office like this and then just moved into more urban and darker and smaller offices until I got here. But I fortuitously made a sideways change into genomics in the late 90s, sort of towards the latter half of the Human Genome Project with a company called Genome Therapeutics Corporation, which was a sequencing company, but they were sequencing bacteria that cause illness. And this was at a time when we would still file patents on genomic sequence, and the patents had to be filed in paper. So when we sequenced the pathogen that causes common staph infections, and it was 19 cases of paper we sent to the patent office. There was nothing but strings of letters of G, C, A, and T. So we've moved a little bit further into the digital age since this time, and I'm delighted then as we to have gotten onto this genomic wave kind of at the right time. So I joined the Broad Institute in 2006. This is a biomedical research institute associated with Harvard, MIT, and the Harvard hospitals, and it grew out of the lab that was the major driver in the U.S. for the Human Genome Project. So a lot of genomic sequencing and a lot of very large-scale work. So in this lower figure here, these are all DNA sequencers. We were really a factory generating an enormous amount of genomic sequence. And this was my introduction really to big data in life sciences. Big data in two respects. One, that it really is quite big and bulky and expensive to store, but also that it required new scientific approaches to make this usable, new statistical approaches, new computer science approaches, new software. And so this is my background, and this is how I come to Fred Hutch. So I'm really excited to be here. I've only been here for 14 months, I think. I guess, so I've at least gone through one whole cycle and I'm back into the dark phase again. But this is not unfamiliar to me. As I said, I've been in graduate school here. My role here is twofold. One is classical enterprise IT, which quite honestly is not tremendously interesting to talk or hear about, but there's a lot interesting going on in it. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. My focus is really on the intersection of technology, data, and science. And this is something that I think is going to be pretty transformative in both biomedical research and hopefully healthcare, but we're not quite there yet. So as kind of a preamble, just to set the stage for what I want to talk about today, I'd like to tell a story about the connected cow. This is a project that was started in Japan. Japanese dairy farmers approached a major Japanese technology conglomerate, Fujitsu, to say, how can you help us improve production and operations in the dairy farm? Fujitsu partnered with Microsoft, and the idea that they came up with is actually quite simple. It's a Fitbit. They put Fitbits on cows. And behind the Fitbits is a technology infrastructure where they can real-time monitor the gait of cows. And this data is uploaded into modern cloud computing architecture, in this case Microsoft Azure. Machine learning approaches have been used to study these data, and I'll talk a little bit about machine learning today. And what they've been able to do through this is, first of all, turns out you can identify the onset of estrus in cattle this way, which is important for timing artificial insemination. But they've been able to identify more than a half dozen different illnesses simply based on the way the cow walks. And this is all done automatically now, so that a farmer can receive a page if any one of the cattle in the cowshed is appearing to behave unusually. This is the present now. But this is not yet the present in healthcare for humans, interestingly. So here's what I hope to talk about today. Hope you'll indulge me. I do want to introduce the concept of big data as it's commonly used really in the technology sector. And I will assert that we don't really have big data in that sense in biomedicine. So we have to think differently about what we're doing. I do want to talk about data science as a new, relatively new cross-disciplinary approach to leveraging data for scientific purposes. I will talk about precision medicine, both in the context specifically of genomics, which is what started the concept of precision medicine. I want to introduce the cancer moonshot, and particularly in the concept of data, and then talk about biomedical big data and what we're doing organizationally at the Hutch. All right? So you guys with me so far? So big data. Again, big data is something that is a term that really grew out of the web era. As things were being interconnected and people could start interacting in different ways, we started to see more and more data from everywhere. So this is kind of a famous picture from The Economist in 2011, which is when this term was first coming into vogue. So just to give you a sense of what big data really means in the technology sector, there's a website called Data Never Sleeps, which keeps updating statistics of how much activity there is in our connected world on the internet. So every minute of every day, about 3 billion text messages are sent. You can look at some of these numbers here, look at the Amazon revenue. These numbers are amazing. And if you're a statistician, this is fantastic, because this is a corpus of data, a scale of data that you can do really sound statistical work with. And so this is where data science, as it's currently being used, evolved. Was on top of these tremendously large data sets, analyzing what people click on web pages what people purchase through sites like Amazon or in big box stores. So this, in a statistical sense, is data that has a large number. We would say it has a large N. This is large N data. This is not, unfortunately, what we have primarily in biomedicine, but again, I will come to that a little bit. I want to introduce just a couple, or refresh people, a couple of statistical concepts along through this discussion. So to begin with, I just want to remind people of correlation. So imagine now you have a group of students, you interview the students, how long did you study, you look at their test scores. You can plot them on a graph, and you can say, there seems to be some correlation here. One can imagine that you could build maybe a predictive model out of this. Correlations can be positive. Correlations can also be negative. But this is sort of a very, one of the simplest approaches to starting to relate data together. It's very important, and this will come back as we get into precision medicine, that correlation is not causation. So it's very easy to find trends in data that look similar, but that it's very difficult to draw causal inference. Still, we're learning something about the data through this. One of the great, probably urban legends, in all honesty, in data science, and again, this field only dates back a few years, concerns Walmart, which was one of the first companies to really start to apply, to leverage all of the data that they were generating throughout their entire business operations to, among other things, optimize the supply chain, optimize placement of things in the store. But the legend goes that in an early analysis, they looked at purchasing habits and determined that quite frequently diapers were bought at the same time as beer. And this led to sort of a hypothesis that mothers home with the children are sending the husbands off to do shopping, and the husbands are taking the opportunity to buy some beer, maybe for the ride home. But this is the beginning of data science. And this is a new way of thinking about science. So here the data, without any idea of what they were going to find, the data suggested something, a behavior, that may or may not be correct, but offers a hypothesis that then can be studied. More complex analysis suggests more complex things. You may remember back in 2011, there was a fair amount of buzz when Target inadvertently outed a pregnant daughter to her parents. And this was based solely on an analysis of shopping patterns, purchasing patterns, across a large N of people. So that many people, with a large N, a large sample size, one could identify these patterns and use that then in kind of a predictive sense. So in this case, seeing what was being purchased suggested that in 3 months there would be different things that were being purchased, and therefore we're going to send targeted marketing material for that. This is something to be aware of, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too. We all leave digital footprints, and these digital footprints tell an enormous amount about us. We spend a lot of time in our field in particular, in biomedicine, but particularly working with human subjects, worrying about privacy of data and individual privacy. There's a lot of data out there that is being collected on all of us just by the way we interact with the internet, with stores, with our credit cards. And these data tell potentially quite a lot about us. This is an example maybe where they're revealing something that we didn't want to share, but it's it's a kind of a teaser for us in the scientific sense. So let me talk just for a few minutes about data science at a high level. And let me go back to that example of diapers and beer. There was a very famous scientist at Microsoft Research who a number of years ago really anticipated quite a lot of the changes that were going to come in this world of big data, and introduced this concept of a new paradigm of science. So suggesting that originally science was very much observational and experimental. This is, we would go out and observe things in the natural world. We would devise experiments to test hypotheses. In this case, this is Archimedes trying to determine if a crown is made of gold by submerging it in water. Then, just over the last couple of centuries, with advances in understanding of the physical world and developing tools alongside it. So Newton is famous both for having an apple fall on his head, but also for developing the mathematical framework to describe that apple falling on his head. So this moved us into a different paradigm of science. In the latter part of the last century, as computation became more and more available, we moved into a phase of simulation. And this is where I got involved in science. So I was modeling artificial oceans in large computers. And this is a very important part of our economy today. This is how we are designing airplanes. This is how we are predicting weather. But now we're moving into this new phase of very, very data-intensive science. We were kind of led into this space first by, probably by the astronomers, actually, who were starting to collect very large data sets with digital telescopes, but then the high-energy physicists, and now, that's a genomic sequencer and the Fitbit, we have many, many sources of data. And as in this diaper and beer example, we have a new model of interacting with science in which we let the data suggest hypothesis to us. So by leveraging appropriate computational approaches, machine learning, and I'll talk just a little bit about machine learning, that we can find patterns in data which, again, may or may not be causal, but may suggest areas of investigation. And this is the potential power now of data that has not been realized yet in healthcare and to a large degree in life sciences research. There are a number of reasons why we're late as a field to adopt big data, and we can talk about those later. I'm not going to talk about them here. But what's important to realize is that data, in this kind of data-intensive science, has touched all of our lives in ways that we're not even cognizant of anymore. We Google things without thinking about it. We ask for directions from our telephone. We get very relevant, almost frighteningly sometimes, targeted advertising when we visit certain websites. There's a lot of data science that's going on behind the scenes in really wonderful ways. I mean, the ways that are making tremendous advances in other industries and in lifestyle. And this is the opportunity then that we have in life science. Data science itself as a discipline is relatively complicated. So I like this characterization of it. There's a piece of it that is statistics, that understands how to apply these statistical approaches and machine learning approaches. There's a computer piece of this. Computation is the tool, so this is something that a data scientist has to be able to wield. But then there's also the requirement that they understand something about the data. So there's this domain expertise. So there are many of us right now, Hutch included, trying to find and hire data scientists. and train data scientists. Seattle probably has one of the highest density anywhere in the world of companies working in data science, because it was companies like Amazon that really pioneered this field. But with Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Facebook, and even Alibaba has their data analytics group here, because the depth of data science expertise is so substantial. But you see that it's a pretty complex type of person that we need to be able to bring in, a really diverse set of skills. And maybe this isn't one person, maybe this isn't the unicorn, but maybe this is rather a team of people with overlapping skills that together can drive this. And that's very much what we're starting to build here. A couple of words then on machine learning. So much of the data that we think about is data we think about really in spreadsheets. Microsoft Excel is the most widely used piece of scientific software in the world in any industry I've seen. In pharma, in automobile design, in aerospace, Microsoft Excel is the tool, because this is a way we know how to interact with data. Now, I want you to hold this as a mental model too. Imagine, for instance, that the rows on this spreadsheet are patients, and the columns are things we know about the patient, measurements that we took when they came into the doctor's office, results of lab tests. And what I will argue is that we don't have a big N number of rows. So within the cancer consortium, of which Hutch is a part, there are about 400,000 cancer patients in our system. But if we want to study any particular disease, say glioblastoma, that number gets much smaller. And that smaller number means that a lot of these powerful tools and approaches of machine learning aren't available to us. But one can imagine, and I'll come back to this a couple of times, that we could expand the number of columns pretty dramatically here. And so that's what I want to talk about. Unfortunately, though, much of the data in our world, especially as it relates to patients and trying to understand patient care, is unstructured data. This is actually a medical note from a patient in 1902. And the difference between 1902 today in our clinics is that these are generally now typed in. But there's actually not much, there's no more structure than there was in 1902 to the data that we're dealing with. So this is where we need some new tools. The conventional approach to doing what we do in, say, clinical trial work is that we pay armies of people to read these, to try to extract salient information and type them into Excel, which gives us a framework that we can compute against them. This is not a scalable model. This doesn't get us to large N. So we also have other classes of unstructured data, very, very large sets of unstructured data that are being collected in our patients in the clinics in the form of image data and others, echocardiograph data. We'll come to some others, but there's a tremendous amount of unstructured data. And this is the trove that we would like to unlock. And this is where we start to bring machine learning. So machine learning, I'm going to use it in a very generic sense to describe a set of approaches to glean information from data. So to start to recognize correlations in data, and that can take many forms. So we make lots of use now of an approach called natural language processing to try to read the text that the physicians have typed in and understand it to the point where we can pull out information that can go into a computational form. So this is an area of active research. It turns out that almost every academic medical center that I know has an active program on the research side in natural language processing, just because of the richness of data that exists in the clinical record that we can't get. There's a very exciting new, sort of both old and new area of machine learning, which is generally referred to as deep learning. This is, in many ways, a resurgence of this idea of neural networks that's been around for a couple of decades, but has been recently revived because we now have an amazing computational power at our hands. And this is starting to do some really interesting things. And this is an area that you're interacting with probably already today without realizing about it. Does anyone here have an Echo? So Alexa, of course, is backed by a deep learning system that's understanding spoken words and figuring out how to translate that into structured information that computers know what to do with. Similarly, Siri and Cortana. A lot of really exciting work in feature detection in imaging. So I don't know if you've played with Google Photos. You can ask, Google has now created a tool that's available to programmers where they will have a computer tell you what is in a picture. A computer can look at a picture and tell you the contents of this picture with pretty staggeringly, like 93% accuracy. And this is really pretty mind-boggling if you think about it. Machine learning is behind a lot of the predictive models that have changed the way we are shopping, the way we are consuming entertainment. So when Netflix makes a movie recommendation, this is a big machine learning backend. When Amazon suggests purchases that you might like to make. And this is starting to make its way into other areas. This is a self-driving Uber, which are starting out on the road in the East Coast. So we have the tools. The tools are being developed now. The data, though, is where we're still going. Just very briefly, because I want to come back to this, one of the other little bits of machine learning, something that machine learning does very well, is a general problem of classification. So let's assume that I have some points. Maybe, again, these are beers and test scores or something, but I know something else. And I can add some information that can teach the computer somehow how to distinguish one group from another, and then have the computer learn how to recognize the difference. And then I can transfer this into another space. So, and this is where we are today with machine learning, where having trained a system that can now recognize different attributes, we can bring in something new and say, can you machine associate this with one of the classes that you've learned, and how confidently can you do that? I want to take a little digression, though, to talk about artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is a term often used synonymously with machine learning, but also used very broadly in the science fiction world, and it's coming up a lot in the popular press. There's a lot of reason to be excited about what machines can do today. We reached a couple of interesting milestones in 2015. In 2015, both Microsoft and Google had submissions to a long-running image analysis competition. And for the first time, both of them were able to classify a large set of images better than humans. In 2015, a Chinese group published results of a deep learning engine taking the written part of SAT exams, and these were specifically the A is to B as C is to D, and scoring as well as humans. So these are very interesting things. And one of the big milestones that we hit a couple of years ago that you may remember was this computer Watson that was built for the purpose of competing on Jeopardy with humans, and it cleaned their clock. It did really well. This was a pretty great thing. Watson, there's a great excitement around Watson as an example of, it's often held up is something approaching artificial intelligence. And IBM has built now an organization around this, applying this in interesting healthcare situations. In fact, there was a piece on 60 Minutes about maybe 3 weeks ago featuring the Cancer Center at UNC that has a project with Watson Health. And this is fantastic. This is a great resource to apply machine learning. But from an artificial intelligence perspective, in the very first collaboration they announced, there was a lot of buzz, and they started referring to Watson as the machine that had gone to medical school. That in the same way that we could train a machine to play on Jeopardy, largely by exposing it to the contents of Wikipedia, which is an online collection of all of the world's trivia, that somehow we could teach it to be a doctor, and so that we would have it go to medical school. Just to offer a counter to that, there was a great article earlier this year which relates to the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, which is that the current state of the art in this whole field and where the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence is pushing right now is trying to pass an 8th grade science test. So from a computational standpoint, that's pretty impressive. It's a far cry from medical school. So we need to be very sober about what we can and can't do with machine learning, and where artificial intelligence is perhaps not quite ready for prime time. And I want to shift gears now and talk about precision medicine. So precision medicine is the beginning of applying data more thoughtfully applying large data more thoughtfully in healthcare. And the background here was very much genomics and what we've been able to do in genomic sequencing. So just by way of refresher, we all have about on the order of 3 billion base pairs, 3 billion from our mother, 3 billion from our father. Of those, the vast majority are the same for all of us. In fact, of those, the majority are the same between me and a chimpanzee. But there are about 1% of the genome varies. The most common variation is this idea of a single nucleotide polymorphism, so a SNP it's called, a single letter that's different in, say, one person from the general population. And with the realization of that, we started to think we can use this information, combined with the fact that we can now generate it very quickly. This is a graph of the cost to generate a human genome, starting from the Human Genome Project itself, which is up in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The cost has come down 100,000-fold. So this is now feasible to do clinically, that we can go in and measure clinically. And in fact, many cancer centers right now are doing some level of genomic sequencing for every patient that walks in the door. The idea being here that if we can understand what is different at the genome level, and we can observe what's different at the patient level, then perhaps, although again, this is now a correlation and not causal, perhaps we can infer something about the biology. So this is a pretty exciting field. This was a big buzz for a long time to try to do this for inherited genomes. So and there were some very early successes, and this led to this idea of personalized medicine. So the challenge with medicine today, roughly the number's not much more than 30% of the medicine that is prescribed to people is effective. And it's a pretty dramatic number. Most of the reason that drugs fail after years of development in the clinic when they first go into people is that they just don't work. And what has been observed is that, well, they work for some people, but not for others. And so that's good enough. And so many of the drugs on the market right now that are prescribed may or may not work very well for the people that they're prescribed to. In some cases, they'll have adverse effects. All the lists of side effects that they speak very quickly at the end of those commercials don't affect everyone, but they affect some people. So the hope is that by using genetics to be able to distinguish people and understand which of them, be able to identify a set that respond. So this now is a classification problem. This is exactly what we looked at before, that we can train, we can start with some people that respond and some people that don't respond, and we can assess their genetic profile, and maybe we'll look at some other molecular data as well. And we can train a system to classify so that when someone else comes in and we can assess their genome, we can decide which way to treat them. So this is the idea behind personalized medicine. It was very exciting. And this led to the National Precision Medicine Initiative that was announced at the State of the Union address in 2015, so not quite 2 years ago. The goal of the one of the goals of the Precision Medicine Initiative is to establish a large N research cohort, so 1 million people. Let's get 1 million people together, get all of their medical data, and get their genetic data so that we can, at this large N scale, apply statistics. This starts to get into the actual big data phase. So this is both a big N, and with genomic and molecular data, it becomes really quite big. In February of this year, the Precision Medicine Initiative held a summit in Washington, D.C. to announce progress that they'd made over the first year. And I was fortunate enough to attend this summit. It was in a room about this size. There were about 125 people that were invited. And the thing that was amazing was the recognition that from the administration and the Precision Medicine Initiative team that technology was a big piece of what was needed to make this successful. So in this amusing panel that was held where the president came out and spoke, on the president's far left is the head of urologic oncology at NIH. To the president's immediate left is a genetic researcher from the Broad Institute. And in between the two is a man called Howard Look, who was a VP of software at Amazon, whose daughter was diagnosed with diabetes. And he grew so frustrated with the fact that her insulin monitor didn't talk to her glucose pump that he started his own nonprofit company to write basically an artificial pancreas and software. But this forum where pulled together the technology leaders along with the scientific leaders. So in the room was Amazon and Google, but also a lot of these new big data companies, names you probably haven't even heard of yet, Cloudera and Hortonworks and many little technology startups. Following the summit itself, we had a closed-door session of there were several different breakout groups, but I was in the data and technology group. And we sat down wrestling with some of these questions of why is it hard for us to get access to the data that we need to do science? What do we need to do? And before this, I would have believed that the Precision Medicine Initiative itself, and even what I'm trying to accomplish here, was maybe a little bit of a fool's errand. But I honestly believe that there is enough intention, not just from the administration in a bipartisan sense, but also from the broader technology sector, the companies that manufacture the software that your doctor types notes into when you go into the clinic. So these are, I believe that's really happening. But I want to distinguish now back to genetics a little bit. When we start to look at complex diseases like diabetes, type 2 diabetes or schizophrenia, we did a study at Broad where we got to as big an N as we could get. We had about 100,000 samples all told. And this was the first time at 100,000 patients that we had the statistical level to identify with any confidence areas of the genome that were associated with schizophrenia. So this is a pretty big deal because schizophrenia is it's long been debated whether or not there's actually genetic triggers. But the challenge that these 108 places, which again are only correlated, there wasn't at this time any causal association, right? Couldn't explain why, just could see that patients who had schizophrenia were slightly more likely to have variations or SNPs at these 108 places than others. So it's not yet a very powerful tool, even with an N of 100,000. Similarly, for inherited mutations in cancer, a lot of people have heard about breast cancer and the BRCA genes. There are actually 3 common genes that are now tested for in breast cancer because they're associated with increased risk, and in some cases so severe that, that people will undergo prophylactic surgery. And we hear a lot about this because they're targeted therapies for these. And yet, these explain only a small fraction of cancer. So the inherited genome, this base genome that we're collecting in the Precision Medicine Initiative, gives us a certain amount of information. But we actually have better tools at hand in cancer. And that's because cancer itself is a disease of the genome. So this is a picture of a genome. This is a kind of a picture called a karyotype. On the right, your left-hand side, sorry, is a normal genome. So the 22 pairs of chromosomes and then the sex chromosomes. And on the right-hand side is a genomic sample from a cancer tumor. And you see that the genome is just completely messed up. And we have multiple copies of some chromosomes, no copies of others, and then a whole bunch of little places where stuff just got glued together in the copying process. And this is what happens in cancer. This makes this kind of genomic sequencing a very powerful tool because here the genomic signatures in cancers are pretty dramatic, much more dramatic than in inherited disease. And this is, for me, part of the enthusiasm now behind the Cancer Moonshot. So at this year's State of the Union address, the Vice President announced an initiative to try to do in 5 years at least 10 years of cancer research, a big moonshot effort. And at almost the same time that the Precision Medicine Initiative Summit was meeting, the Vice President had convened the first meeting of a cross-agency task force to think about what does this mean? What is it going to take to go after cancer? As part of that, the Vice President did a listening tour. He went to a number of cancer centers across the U.S., including here at Fred Hutch. There were a series over the summer of summits bringing together multiple constituencies, so clinicians and researchers and patient advocates, and these were held simultaneously. There were about 240 of them across the country. This is one that we had here. And out of this, some 16,000 ideas were gleaned and went back to the task force. And for me, and I think really the motivation for the task force is that this is the right time. So as any of you who read at least the Seattle Times know, earlier this year we announced the results of a clinical trial in which 29 patients with advanced lymphoma who had exhausted all other sort of therapeutic options, and really we're looking at on the order of months to live probably, were treated with an immunotherapeutic approach, in this case an engineered immune cell, T cell. And of the 29, 27 went into what clinicians will call durable remission. This is amazing. This is transformative. This is not just extending lives by months. This is actually, this is actually having an enormous impact. So how do we get there? So there's an article 2 weeks ago in Wired magazine interviewing a researcher at Mount Sinai Hospital. I just like the quote very much. The cure for cancer is data, mountains of data. And this is exactly what the Moonshot came up with as well. So the National Cancer Institute, as part of the Moonshot, convened a blue ribbon panel. In October, they released their draft report. One of their 10 recommendations is to create a national cancer data ecosystem. The task force released its report about 2 weeks later and has called out under a set of 4 strategic goals, goal to unleash the power of data. So, what data are we talking about, and how are we going to do this at Hutch? Let me just remind people that there's actually, coming back to even this target example, there's a lot of information available about everyone. And this was a study that was published by two researchers, Microsoft Research, working with someone at Columbia University, that were simply looking at the history of people's search terms in Bing. And were able to identify, through this process, develop a model that could reliably identify people with pancreatic cancer before it had been diagnosed. So this, again, there's this promise of a trove of data that hasn't yet been tapped to bring into the biomedical space. So I'm going to put up a very complicated picture. I don't expect anyone to understand it. I've been staring at it for months. This was from a paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association about big data in biomedicine. But I just want to point out a couple of things. The basic idea here is the rows are different classes of data, of information that we want to know about patients, about what medications they're taking, their basic demographics, how old they are, where they live, about encounters they have in the clinic, about how they were diagnosed, how they were treated, about labs, about genetics, family history, but then broader things, lifestyle, socioeconomic status. What does their social network look like? Where have they lived? What have they been exposed to environmentally? And this starts to imagine the whole universe of data that we can bring to bear in this problem that range from traditional clinical records, which are, as we noted, hard to work with because they weren't really developed for research purposes. But a clinical record may tell you if a patient has been prescribed a medication, but it probably doesn't know whether or not the patient filled the prescription and absolutely doesn't know if they took the medicine. So is there a way that we can leverage some of these other data to learn more, not just about individuals, but populations, but what's happening to patients between clinical encounters? One of the labs here is just in the early phase of working with a set of so-called commercial data, these data that are being bought and sold, collected about all of us and sold for marketing purposes and all of that. They have partnered with one of these companies and brought in so-called consumer data for 18,000 patients in Western Washington. And we're just at the early stage of what does this mean? What can we learn for our patients? So what we've been doing here at Broad just over the last couple of months is we're building a new organization to address this problem. This is called the Hutch Data Commonwealth. And this is intending to bring together data science expertise, expertise in working with clinical informatics, and then software engineering, because this is a piece that part of what we need to do is build the new set of tools that we're going to be using both on the research side and then ultimately to drive activity in the clinic. And we've set as our scope the whole universe of potential data that are available for patients, from the molecular data, the genomic data, the data that's driving the precision medicine initiative, through some of these social data, histories of environmental exposure. And we recognize, moreover, that even with all of this, we don't have a big enough N. So that a lot of what we will need to do in order to really be successful is start to partner with other cancer centers, other medical organizations like ours, because we all need more data to be able to address this problem. So just very briefly, I see that I'm coming to time. Here's what we're working on right now in the Commonwealth. I'm happy to answer more questions about it. Building out capabilities in what we're calling high-dimensional data integration. So all of these different data types represent different dimensions, but they all have very different properties, and what you need to do mathematically to bring these together is very different. As I mentioned, we have a natural language processing program to pull structured information out of clinical data. We have a very early pilot project now, taking some of this deep learning approach, which actually became famous for being able to identify cat videos in YouTube, and using it in analysis of features from a new abbreviated MRI protocol for breast imaging. A lot of interest right now in mobile devices, so starting to do some work in interventions through mobile devices. I have a researcher who has a very successful smoking cessation app, which is an interactive tool. It's collecting data. It's leveraging, or the next generation, if we're successful, will leverage what are being referred to now as a chat bot, but something that understands spoken language and can respond to it. And then a big area of focus is, and one of the reasons, in all honesty, that I came to the Hutch, is that we sit in this ecosystem of technology that, when coupled with the science and biological data we have here, can really accelerate the whole field of cancer research. So a lot of my focus now is how do we work together with these great technology companies. So let me just finish very briefly. The big data revolution in healthcare isn't here yet. And it will come. I'm perhaps an optimist. But it will come, and it will be transformative. We're challenged, though, compared to what big data has done for other industries, because we don't really have this big N. At least none of us by ourselves have this big N. And this is what's led to this precision medicine initiative, million-person cohort. This is what's starting to drive now a number of cancer centers to form data-sharing collaboratives. And this is really what it's going to take. This is going to take collaboration in a way that is not actually comfortable in a traditional academic model. Sharing of data pre-publication is not something that's commonly done in academia. And this is something I believe very strongly, that this is a new class of capability that we need to develop. And it's not something that's going to be solved by a conventional IT organization. This is really something where we need to be able to leverage the best of what these big technology companies are doing and focus it in our areas. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions for Matthew?
So you were talking about data sharing, and actually the geographically easiest place to share data about cancer research is with Swedish. Mm-hmm. And the relationship has not always been friendly, to put it mildly. There is some work done at Virginia Mason, but basically Swedish is the cub compared to Hutch being the big bear. Mm-hmm. Has any work been done to smooth some of the rough edges between the relationship, although they're not a member of the consortium, I know that. But heck, it's the other thing that's nice is it's the same population. It's not like, oh, it's different in mm-hmm. Buffalo, so we can't use Roswell Park, or it's different in Houston, so we can't use MD Anderson type of thing.
Mm-hmm. So I can't speak to the relationship itself, but one of the groups that the Commonwealth is working with very closely is Scott Ramsey and the HICOR. This is the Hutch Institution for Cancer Outcomes Research. So HICOR has been working to leverage insurance company data, so the claims data that go to insurance companies, to help infer more about the success of treatment. So how can we learn, because we recognize the gaps in the medical record, what can we learn from the payer data to understand how well healthcare is working? And we're actively in discussions with Swedish now about leveraging both EHR data and the and associated payer data as part of the HICOR project. So I believe that we will get through this.
Thank you, Matthew. It was a great talk. I have just wanting to see where your view about, you mentioned about earlier the connected cow, that in a sense they don't know they are actively participating. It's passively participating. And for currently, if my viewpoint, it's a lot of things for human data is more participation oriented. Mm-hmm. So when you show that kind of big, the complicated figures you shows, there are many of them is actually like socio-economic kind of things is actually segmented in different place. And there is no really, I don't think, unless you are actively signed a participant, there is no, seems like so far, there is no good way to collect those things all together. So what is your viewpoint about collecting this passive but comprehensive data for that population, including like where you have been, like geography data, weather, or those kind of?
It's a very good question, but the fact is a lot of those data are being collected. There are a number of companies that are already doing the work to aggregate those data because there's a commercial market for them. So
but as a one row, in other words, associated with what with that person?
Well, so the identifying patients across these data sets is a very challenging problem. This is one of the interesting technical challenges in general about data sharing, is that patients are often seen in multiple healthcare systems, and we, by law, don't have a universal patient identifier, so we don't really have ways to connect up the data. So there are definitely problems about using these data at an individual level. The early wins will be using these at a population level. What has to happen, we're going to talk about data sharing, and I mean all the medical organizations are talking, how do we share data with each other? And we always come down to arguments over data ownership. So who owns genomic sequence data that was generated in a clinic? Is it the patient whose genome it was? Is it the hospital where the work was done? Is it the insurance company that paid for that to be done? And these questions aren't actually clear. The right answer should be the patient. And so the right way to engage should be the patient. One of the things that I'd like to see, and there's some discussion about this, I've heard in various corners, is a very large-scale data donor program, right? So if we could get people to say, yes, you can have my data. In some cases, we may already have the data, but you're just giving us permission to use it. It could make an enormous difference. Yeah. And so so that's ultimately the only way that we're really going to get to the end we need is for patients to participate actively, at least insofar as giving permission, even if that permission is to collect data passively.
We have one right up here.
I think that one was, okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention the Broad Institute, MIT, and Harvard are doing a metastatic breast cancer study.
Yep.
And that is patient data collection. Patients around the country can opt in. They will, to my understanding, collect tissue samples. They're sending out swab kits. They're collecting the swabs. The data, when that is all collected, will be available to the public, to research institutions, to patients. I am a metastatic breast cancer survivor for the moment, and I am participating in that study.
Outstanding.
I'm a patient at Swedish, and I'm trying to advocate for Swedish to get the information out to their patients. And so the more institutions and the more individuals on social media who mention the Metastatic Breast Cancer Project, it's a start, and it's directly what you're talking about.
Yeah, the Metastatic Breast Cancer Project is a wonderful example, and we've been talking internally about using it as a model potentially, and actually been talking to the group there about using it as a model for something else. Often, the most motivated patients are around a specific disease area. So specific patient populations can be very good partners in a data sense and a research sense. But I think it's a tremendously successful project.
Thanks for your talk. It was great. How is the research mission of the Hutch different from that of the Institute for Systems Biology?
I don't know that I can speak authoritatively to the mission for the Institute for Systems Biology. At some level, we're all trying to do the same thing, which is to understand human biology sufficiently that we can improve care, prevention, treatment for patients. Our mission focuses specifically on development of both prevention and therapeutic intervention. The scientific approaches that the organizations are taking are really rather different. So the Institute for Systems Biology grew up largely out of this field of what's called proteomics, looking to see what proteins are active in cells. And this is a very exciting area. That's an area we've got a small amount of work going on here at Hutch about, but that's a place that ISB really has leadership. So, but I can't speak to mission.
Can you just speak a little about data quality?
Yeah.
And yeah, I just keep
Sorry.
wondering because I think one of the limitations in health data is just even how we've defined different outcomes has changed significantly over time, and just it seems like we have both a great opportunity and a lot of limitations with this sort of technology.
No, I agree, and the person who leads my data quality team is somewhere in the audience here, and I'm sure he'll agree too. The old adage is certainly true that if you're putting garbage in, you're going to get garbage out, but the process of data curation is today rate limited by humans, and that we can't scale that. So There are a couple of different approaches that are being developed now around this. There's a very interesting company out of Boston called Tamer, which is developing a tool that is trying to accelerate data curation, again, by applying some machine learning. One of the places that I think is underdeveloped, and that I'm really, although I don't quite have the math background for it, the place where I think that we're going to start to be able to move things forward is not to fix the quality, but just to understand where it's bad. To carry that knowledge through when we do analysis to the point where we have an interesting result, and only then do you put the effort in to go back and curate. And here, again, we can look to what the tech industry has done. So one of the early disruptive thing that Google did was what's called PageRank. So it was the early approach to say, to figure out how to take really imperfect data, but that has some indications of quality because it has some human curation, and use that to rank order results. And in that model, it didn't have to be perfect, but if it's good enough, then you know how to focus efforts beyond that. So does that make sense? So I'm not going to be daunted by data quality. I can't tell you, we just started poking through, actually just came from a meeting of other cancer centers, and people comparing notes on, for instance, how many records they have in their electronic healthcare system for women with prostate cancer or men with cervical cancer. We just looked earlier this week, and a large number, probably 20% of the records in our healthcare system, the patients have unknown gender. So data quality is a real problem. But this is also a place where I think that machine learning will help us.
Matthew, first of all, thanks for the talk. Really, really insightful. Is the consortium of companies trying to work on an overall data architecture for both structured and unstructured data? I mean, all the different groups have stored their data for years and years, all in different formats and different systems. And so how do you solve that problem for both unstructured and structured data?
Yep. I have given up hope that we will come to a common data model.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way it's going to work.
Yeah.
The way we will move forward, and again, this is taking a page from the technology industry, is by carefully defining interfaces between systems.
Yeah.
So if I can ask a question of your data, and I know how you're going to give me the answer, I don't care how you're storing it, as long as we can agree on how we're going to exchange the data. So there is a standards body called HL7, which defines how healthcare data move around electronically. So from laboratory instrument to computer, or into the electronic health record system, probably 70% of all healthcare transactions worldwide flow through one of these HL7 interfaces. There's a new version of the HL7 standard that looks like a modern programming paradigm. It's really tremendous. And to the point where the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, held a hackathon in April, they exposed some data through a web service, which is a technology really that Amazon started championing in 2002, I think, and exposed this to developers, and got a whole community of people writing software against their data without having to change what are absolutely arcane systems inside CMS, but by solving it through this interface problem.
That's really cool. Just quick follow on then. Do you think if you had all this data for any particular disease, N gets big enough where the data is insightful and you can ask the questions that you need to ask?
Well, happily, I think we'll find we don't have to answer questions that are entirely specific to a disease. So we will converge at some level in between where the biology will be will help guide what we need to do, and this is will be at the level of molecular pathways probably rather than at the level of this specific genetic mutation. And there, yes, N will be big enough to shed sufficient light on those.
You talked earlier about data linking to patients.
Yes.
What is it that we can do to help that?
I would very much like to start a data donor program at Hutch, and this is one of the things that I'll look at over over the coming months. But really, it's going to be standing up and saying, "Yeah, you can use my data."
So that's what we ought to do to the doctor when we go to the doctor.
So one of the ways that we're hoping to shift the healthcare system is to make it easier and more attractive for patients to do just that, so that when they first engage, that they can consent to having their data used for research purposes. And if that were the standard process, that most people said yes, doesn't have to be everyone, but that if most people were to say yes, that you can use, and if we across the healthcare system could agree on just how we write those words, because if you don't, then it gets tripped up over lawyers and all that sort of stuff. But and this is the idea of what's called an open consent or a universal consent, and this could change a lot if we can achieve that.
Can you identify me because of my genomes? Would that be a mechanism?
So legally, no. I mean, which is to say, there.
See, if you have my genome,
I have everything. Yes.
And have it, okay, then you don't attach my name to it. Then you can, the next time my stuff comes to you, you can say, "Oh yeah, it's that guy."
It's true. We will. The regulations that define what is protected personal information or protected health information, right now they don't apply to genomic data, and they're being modified right now because we actually know. It's been shown computationally that there's plenty of information in a genome that with a small amount of other information that you're easily identified. So
my question is, what are other countries doing, and are you following any of that? Also, what about the NCI and the NIH about the data that they have? And lastly, more complicated, how are you going to get other institutions, both in the United States and around the world, to share information when it so much seems like it's proprietary, nobody wants to share, so that when we all go searching for data, it takes hours, days, months to get it. So how are you going to collaborate and get them to share that information?
Very excellent question. So international data privacy laws are challenging. There are countries that are doing this very well. One of the most surprising to me actually is Estonia. So Estonia, a country in Eastern Europe that actually got to invent its government in the era of the internet. And as a result, things work the way you would like them to do. You have a card that you can use to pay taxes and get access to your medical records and everything, right? Everything's all connected, and they have a substantial biobanking program, and really, it's an impressive model. On the other hand, we have the EU, which has recently agreed to enact a new set of data privacy laws, the so-called GDPR, global data privacy regulations, that are going to make it tremendously difficult for us to move data out of sovereign areas, or to work on data that come from specific countries without a lot of additional effort. In the genomic space, there is an organization that was established about 4 years ago called the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. This is run now out of the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research in Toronto. It has about 300 member organizations in, I don't remember, 30 different countries. And what they're trying to do right now is tackle exactly this problem for genomic data. How can we make it so that if it's not that we're sharing data, how can we at least do computation on it and ask questions of it and bring the answers back together? We're not going to get to a global solution. I'd be happy just to get all the data in Seattle at this point. We're going to have a go at Washington, but yeah. And you also asked about NCI and NIH. So NCI has been very involved in the Cancer Moonshot project. Data sharing is very much a mission of theirs. They have recently established what's called the Genomic Data Commons. So this is basically a big computational infrastructure that's hosted at the University of Chicago, which currently has on the order of, I don't remember the current number, maybe 30,000 genomes and very basic clinical information along with it. So they're trying to push that model. Part of what I want to do with the Commonwealth is to create that conduit so that we can be really a regional data aggregation center that can partner with other organizations and with the NCI for data sharing purposes. Please feel free to leave. It's late. I won't be offended at all, I promise.
I'm wondering what incentives you might have in mind for both individuals, governments, corporations, academic institutions, hospitals, to share data. That question is actually relevant even at a much smaller scale. How do I get labs within Fred Hutch to share data? And no, I mean, the challenge is exactly as you suggested, that the incentives are misaligned. So if I generate data and I want to make it usable by you, I have to do extra work, but you get to benefit from it. So within the Hutch, I intend through the Commonwealth to actually directly incent that. That is, I will pay labs to work with me to bring data. The promise of what we're doing right now, and really this is the goal of the Cancer Moonshot, what we will do will lower the cost, will both improve health care and lower the cost of health care. So one of the groups that actually have the most accessible and best structured data are the insurance companies. And they're the ones that stand to benefit quite a lot from improvements in operations. And so many of them have their own data organizations right now. But we are, in fact, 2 weeks from tomorrow, we are meeting at the White House, the High Court team and a number of the insurance company leaders under the umbrella of the Cancer Moonshot to ask exactly that question. How do we engage them in a way that they'll provide data for research purposes, and how can we quantify the value back to them of that? At the government level, I don't know. In between, data have monetary value. People are buying my credit history and selling it. And in our space, there are examples of marketplaces where the pharmaceutical companies are the ones who are ultimately putting dollars in to drive data sharing consortia because it helps accelerate their research. So there they're point solutions around for how we're going to make the data flow.
So if you could cap my insurance premiums, I could trade you my data.
So I hear, no. This is actually this is a fabulous suggestion, and I heard tell, and I haven't been able to verify that there is a small insurer in Ohio that is offering now lower premiums if you consent to let your data be used for research. So there are ways to do that. We'll see. We'll see what works.
So we have time for one more question.
I just want to add a consideration in terms of patient data collection.
Yes.
When we think about doing that, I think it's really critical that we start doing that as a cultural thing. But when we do patient data collection, we're going to miss a number of pieces of data if we try to do that at their first contact or their first point of diagnosis. We're going to need to go back to patients a month or 3 months later and request their consent to participate and provide tissue samples, because when a patient is first being diagnosed, even with a low stage cancer, for example, they're terrified.
Yeah.
They're faced with lots of decisions to make. They're not processing. They're
Yep.
anxious. And so if they're barely, and these are high functioning, intelligent people that experience this, everyone stops thinking when they're anxious. So they're not likely, they're going to gloss over that. Oh, not today. So I think we really, really need to go back to patients when they're in a more stable place to be able to be asked to give consent and continue to revisit it until we get consent.
Agreed. And in fact, the consenting process should start much earlier than that. The consenting process should start when you go in for your annual checkup, right? Before you get to the stage, because it's really that whole historical set of data that are relevant to leading up. So, all right, are we all done? Thank you, everyone.